I like the concept of letting these thoughts flow through without judgment. I think one of the things that many of us struggle with is letting other people and circumstances in our life drive us crazy. The managing partner who doesn't speak to us the way we want or whatever. And I'm a big
Yeah.
believer in the concept of acceptance, which I think is some often kind of connected with being mindful, to just accepting those circumstances I can't control. And the one thing
Yeah.
I can control is how my mind works, what I'm thinking about, how I'm processing those situations.
Yeah, so acceptance is actually one of the what's known as the attitudinal foundations. There are these qualities that with a regular practice of mindfulness we can strengthen and grow, acceptance being one. And like you're saying, like we can't control certain people in our lives, whether it's in our personal world or the professional sector, but what we can control is how we respond. And we can realize that with awareness, we can create some space so we don't react and further compound the stress that we experience, but we can change the dance, so to speak.
Welcome to the Free Lawyer Podcast. I'm your host, Gary Miles. The Free Lawyer Podcast is designed for the lawyer, entrepreneur, or professional who is in some way unfulfilled, stressed, or stuck, and is looking for something better. We will discuss various blocks that limit us from achieving the personal freedom that we all desire, but have not yet fully experienced. And we will give actionable steps to free yourself from them. Are you looking to achieve a new level of success? If so, this podcast is for you.
Hey, everybody, welcome to today's episode of The Free Lawyer. And, we often talk about how stressful our practice is. And I don't know if you find that, but I certainly find law to be a very, very stressful place. And one of the keys to helping us to manage that stress is mindfulness. And we're blessed to have today not only one of the best litigators around, but someone who is really, truly, in my opinion, an expert in mindfulness, and who teaches us how to be more mindful and some healthy mindfulness practices. So Courtney Schulnick is joining us here today, a lawyer in the Pennsylvania area and a mindfulness teacher. Courtney, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the kind introduction.
Well, well deserved. So Courtney, I know you're a lawyer, a litigator, a mindfulness teacher. So tell me a little bit about your journey through law, how you found mindfulness and why you chose it.
Yeah, sure. So, as it turns out, my own experience with stress and anxiety is what became my path to mindfulness meditation. I grappled with anxiety as a child, and it sort of intensified as I came into adulthood, as I grew my responsibilities as an attorney, and as I expanded my family. Sort of that juggle in trying to find some type of balance between the work that we do as a lawyer, or in my case as a litigator, and sort of like the unpredictable schedule, both in the personal world of having children and getting called for trial. I really noticed the ways in which my anxiety heightened. So I had been working with therapists for many years to better manage the stressors and my experience with anxiety. And at her suggestion, she recommended what's known as the Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction Program. At the time, it was being offered two different places in Philadelphia, which is where I was living and where I was working. But when she recommended it, I had a toddler and I had a newborn, and I was working full-time and had a pretty significant caseload. On top of that, I have a husband, and there were a lot of demands on the personal front. So the thought of committing 2.5 hours once a week for 8 weeks, which is what the program entails, the MBSR program, it completely overwhelmed me. And a program that's designed to reduce stress, I just felt like it was, at that point, it didn't feel like it was attainable. So I put it off.
It was pretty overwhelming, and I could see, why you would have put it off. And before we get to that piece of it,
Yeah,
the decision,
yeah.
Tell me about your practice then. What kind of work you did and what kind of stresses, if any, it created for you.
Sure, sure. So I've been working for a large law firm in Philadelphia as a litigator, handling premises liability cases. So anything from a slip and fall to a motor vehicle accident to a bar fight, I am retained by insurance companies to defend the person being sued or the entity. It could be a business or a homeowner. So there's a lot of moving parts in addition to having superior attorneys that I work under. There are insurance adjusters that you have to deal with, and then you also have the insureds. So there are a lot of people that you answer to and a lot of emotions at play, including your own.
And I also did insurance work for quite a while in the transportation arena, defending truck drivers and trucking companies, but you also have the other lawyer to deal with.
I was just
Don't forget
going
the other lawyer. Sometimes that's a very nice and very professional relationship. Sometimes it's more of a challenge, isn't it?
I agree with you. And I think this may be a stereotype, but I think even starting out as the newbie, sometimes you're more prone to get pushed around. But even as a more seasoned attorney, you still come across some adversaries who really do a good job at making your life and the work that we do more challenging, even when it's challenging just in and of itself. Yeah. So the adversary for sure.
You felt some stress as well from your practice of law between your caseload, performing to your superiors' goals, dealing with adjusters, the insurance company and the insureds, and imposing. I create a lot of stress for you.
Yeah, not to mention the underlying issues in the cases. I mean, some of the cases you're dealing with children who were badly injured adults. There are really complicated issues that you're having to resolve. There's procedural hurdles. So it's so layered that even aside from having deadlines and resolving difficult issues, just the time and energy that is needed, it can all build up and feel really overwhelming.
So you looked into the mindfulness-based stress reduction program, and initially you declined because your plate was overflowing.
Yeah.
Did you reconsider that and enter that program?
I did. So my husband and I had come into some difficulty on the fertility front, and there were different sort of emotions that came up with that. And fast forward to combining that with just what was already intense from the work end. But then I had a dog who in many ways, before I even knew what mindfulness was, he really embodied mindfulness. I considered him our first child. Before we had any human sons, we had our dog Jackson. And when I was at work, he got sick and he passed away that evening. And that represented a lot for me. I think that it was the straw that broke the camel's back, in the sense that I had just been powering through, like with all of the loss that we had experienced on the fertility end, and how hard I was just working and throwing all my time and energy into my work, sort of numbing out what was happening in the personal but also attending to the needs of my family, my two young sons at the time. That loss, when our dog passed away, everything just intensified. And in addition to, I was a person who grappled with anxiety, but depression wasn't as familiar territory. I definitely had moments where I felt a little bit down or sad, but in that moment, something just really hit home differently than it had at any other moment. So for weeks, months, I wasn't present. I would be at work and would feel really bad when I was in the office about how I was crying or sad at home, not attending to my kids or really present for them. And yet when I was at home with them, I would be worrying about missing a deadline or what had to get done with the workload.
And after just commenting briefly on that comment,
yeah,
I've experienced that so much that particularly earlier in my life, I struggled so much to be present where I was. My mind was always at the other place, whatever it was. And
Yeah.
that creates its own form of stress for me that's self-created by not being
Yes.
present and doing my job at the office, being present at the kids' ball game and really enjoying that. I was always somewhere else, and I always felt additional stress from that.
Yeah, and it's just human condition, it's just the way our minds work. But I think as attorneys, we have even a stronger tendency to get lost in the future. It comes from a good place, but we want to achieve a certain outcome. So our minds get very pigeonholed on what it is we want in the future. And on the flip side, we maybe go back to the past of where we went wrong in other cases, or we think we could have done better. So there's this constant like pendulum movement within the mind. And when we live in that way, we can really stir up a lot of, as you said, like we create a lot of unnecessary suffering for ourselves.
Well,
So I was,
the future is full, for me, the future is full of worry. And
yeah,
the past is full of regret or
yeah,
resentment or things like
yeah,
that. There's nothing that good comes out of thinking. Now, we do have to
yeah,
plan our cases. We got to put things in our calendar. We got to think about
yeah.
when we set out discovery. But when we think too much about the future, we're just full of worry. And the past, to me, just brings regret and resentment.
Right, right. And the truth is, we can only control so much.
Right.
So, and I noticed that. I noticed how I was rehashing the past, thinking I could have left the office earlier that day and spent more time with my dog, or I could have, you know, even aside from what happened with my dog, but going back to my work and then thinking back to what I have coming up for the children or the deadlines I have to meet. So I really wasn't in a good place. I wasn't in a good place emotionally. I wasn't in a good place physically. And I wanted to enjoy life. I knew that there was so much goodness in my life, but I wasn't really able to see it or to be present for it. And I wanted to be a better wife. I wanted to be a better mother and friend and worker. So it was impacting every aspect of my life. So I went back to a therapy session with my therapist, and I asked her more about this mindfulness program that she had told me about. And after doing some research and talking to her, I found out that Jefferson, the Center for Mindfulness, which is located in Philadelphia, and it was on the way home. I would bike home from the office in Center City to where I was living in Queen Village, Philadelphia. And so it was on the way home, and I figured, okay, I can weave this in at night after working. And that was it. I enrolled, and the program, as I mentioned, is 8 weeks. The first, I always like to share this with other people who take the program, because I now teach it at the Center for Mindfulness. And that first session, I walked out, like if my anxiety at that time was at a 10, I walked out with it being at like a 20, because we practice what's known as a body scan meditation. And I didn't realize, even when I was doing something really good for myself, I was in this program that was designed to reduce stress and anxiety, I was so judgmental of myself in that moment as we were practicing, thinking I'm not doing this right, or I'm doing this wrong or that wrong. And that was great for me to see just how judgmental I was in that moment, but just how judgmental I, like so many others, and lawyers in particular, can be of ourselves. And that became the gateway to really being kinder to myself, to noticing how easily we can get in our own way and compound the stressors in our lives. So week 2, I noticed a little shift, a little bit of ease, and something just clicked for me. In week 3, I started to notice how I was perceiving some of the stressors, both in my personal life and in the work setting. And I was able to start applying the formal practices as well as the informal practices into my day-to-day life.
I like what you said about being kinder to ourselves. And,
Yeah.
We can do that with or without mindfulness training, although I think the mindfulness training is helpful for sure. but so often we're our own worst critic. And
Yes.
my wife could do something stupid or whatever, and I'm like, oh, it's fine, I don't care, it's no problem. And then I
Yeah.
drop a glass, it breaks on the floor, and I start screaming at myself. It's just,
Yeah.
he said, it's a broken glass, we'll clean it up. It's like, I should have dropped it. I'm so much harder on myself than I am on someone else. And if we could speak to ourselves the way we speak to our children or our spouse,
Yeah.
it'd be so much better. But we're so hard on ourselves, aren't we?
So hard, so hard. And it it's not familiar territory for many people. Like we'll be the first to hold the door for someone, or if a young child falls, we'll be really caring and compassionate. But when it comes to us, like you said, you mentioned the glass falling, like that already could hurt, especially if the glass cut us or it hit our foot in a funny way. But then we call it like the second arrow. Like the first arrow, it already hurts. But then we shoot ourselves with this second arrow and we create a lot of unnecessary suffering.
That's true. So how has this mindfulness training that you've gotten impacted your stress levels, your anxiety, both personally and professionally? How has it helped?
Yeah, so personally, I'm able to notice when I'm lost in worry of the future, or maybe I'm giving myself a hard time for something from the past, or maybe I'm even like in the present moment, I'm just judging. I'm being really critical of myself. And then with that awareness, I can kind of put it in its place. Like I don't have to judge myself on top of the judging, but in that moment, the ability to see what is happening, then I can choose to show up more fully, whether it's I'm watching one of my sons play baseball or I'm enjoying a really delicious meal out with my husband. Like I can choose to really show up for that experience. In the professional sector, I would say that in the work that we do as attorneys, we fall into what's known as autopilot mode, where we just keep going. Like we keep doing, and it's very hard for us to step away from our work, to give ourselves moments to rest. And when we sort of live in this way of constant doing, we can fall into reactivity. So we just habitually react without really taking moments to notice what's here, notice how we are, maybe noticing what's happening with, it could be our adversary, it could be with the client. We're not really aware, we're not opening to the full picture. So with mindfulness practice, I'm able to notice when I'm in autopilot, when I'm just falling into reactivity, and the ability to recognize that is what allows me to create some space so that I can choose how to skillfully respond. Whether it's, I see an email, a contentious email from the other attorney representing the other side, rather than firing off an email and I'm going to think, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have said things, or I shouldn't have written that. Or you say something during a deposition back to an attorney and you're embarrassed in front of your client. You can create some space so that you can see the big picture, and you can think, okay, what's going to serve me? What's going to most serve my client? What's going to help me achieve an optimal outcome without shooting myself in the foot? So it's been helpful in that way.
Be self-aware of where you are, and we're thoughtful about your response or your.
Yes. Yeah.
And, law can be so stressful. You talked about the stresses you felt doing your defense work and premises liability cases. And I did family law. That can be very, very stressful as well.
Yeah.
How does mindfulness, for that lawyer who's listening, who says, wow, you don't know how much stress I'm under, how can mindfulness help that lawyer who's listening, who feels so stressed and so overwhelmed?
Yeah. So, well, first off, there's the awareness piece. So just for listeners who aren't really familiar with what mindfulness is, the long and short, or I should say the short of it, is it's basically awareness. It's awareness in the present moment and the ability to see. Jon Kabat-Zinn, who created the Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction program, he defines it as paying attention on purpose in the present moment and without judging oneself, so non-judgmentally. And I think that for an attorney wondering, how can this help me? First off, we can notice, are we present? And when we notice that maybe we're not present, well, then we can direct attention inward to notice, how am I feeling physically? Like, am I holding the muscles within my body tightly? Because that can create a lot of extra unnecessary stress. So we can invite some ease into the body. We can notice our thoughts, because oftentimes we're not so kind in the things that we tell ourselves. Like, we don't say it out loud, but our thoughts, from an evolutionary standpoint, we can be very, very negative towards ourselves. So we can notice what we're telling ourselves, and we can notice what emotions are here. As attorneys, I think we're expected to, we're expected as litigators to be the pit bull in court. And so we kind of stuff our emotions under the carpet. But we want to, with the light of mindfulness, we want to turn towards what's here, because if we just keep going, then we're going to perpetuate some of our ways that really don't serve us. So for someone who's wondering, it's about awareness. It's self-awareness, so that we can best support ourselves. And if we're in a better place physically, emotionally, well, then we're going to be able to do better work. We're going to be better at assisting the needs of our clients, of our colleagues, of all those who we work together with. And I think there was another part of your question, but there's something.
You covered very well. You've
Yeah.
transitioned from learning about mindfulness and being a student to teaching it. And what inspired you to take that step? And what's the most rewarding part of now teaching mindfulness?
Yeah. So people find this hard to believe, because I tend to be chatty catty at times. And sometimes that comes from my own nervousness or anxiety, but I'm not always most comfortable taking center stage or being in front of people. Surprisingly, I'm a litigator. I get in front of a judge and others in court, but it's not always my comfort zone. But one of my colleagues, an associate at the time, this was almost 10 years ago, who I worked closely with, I had been sharing with him that I had enrolled in the MBSR program. And I think he started to notice a shift in me, just a little bit more ease and smiling and some relaxation in the workplace, which is when I tended to get like constricted and really nervous. And he said, this stuff, this really sounds like great stuff. You should give like a lunch and learn, like offer a workshop within the firm. And I said, I don't know about that. And I don't know if I know enough. I don't know if I'm, like, a common theme in my life is I don't know if I'm good enough. So I didn't know if I knew enough, if I could have the confidence to speak about mindfulness in front of my colleagues. But I took him up on it. I approached the gentleman at our firm who's in charge of programming and workshops, and I offered during lunchtime a 1-hour workshop, just like an introductory session. I made a PowerPoint and sort of made it light and shared my personal experience. It was the scariest thing ever to sort of put myself out there in that way. But I will say that that's what encouraged me to learn how to teach, to take the extensive teaching program at Jefferson. After that workshop, I had people, they were assistants, they were associates, they were partners. I had people coming into my office, sending me emails saying, thank you so much for sharing your story, for helping me to see I'm not alone in my thoughts and my feelings. And even just some of we call them, they're known as on-the-spot practices. They're just short, little mindfulness practices that you can call into practice when you're getting ready to go into a deposition or start a trial. Those little practices that I taught, people said that they really, really allowed them to find more ease.
What are examples of some of those on-the-spot practices that can help the lawyers you taught there at your firm?
Sure. So the one that we often teach in the MBSR program isn't a mindfulness practice per se, but it is a practice that can help incline ourselves in the direction of relaxation. And when we're feeling more relaxed, then we are more aware, we have a clearer sense in the mind, and we can really respond more skillfully. So it's called the 3 relaxing sighs. And it's pretty simple, but we simply take an inhalation through the nostrils, and then we open up the mouth and let out a gentle sigh. And you can make it audible. We say it could be like a stealth, relaxing sigh. You can do it, when you're coming into the office and you're on the elevator with a whole elevator full of people. You just silently take a few relaxing sighs. The studies show that 3 seems to be the magic number. So 3 relaxing sighs has a physiological connection so that the body and the mind can move in the direction of ease.
So that seems so simple. And
Yeah.
I know what your answer is, but I mean, does it work taking 3 sighs before I go into that hearing, before that judge who's very demanding? Will that help to relieve my stress and be more present?
It's one tool that can. There's scientific research that supports it. It really, mindfulness is very simple, but yet at the same time profound. So a lot of these practices that we teach, even that's not a formal practice, that's not even a mindfulness practice per se, but even the formal meditations are quite simple and they're really innate, but it's just a matter of ourselves tapping in, like we're in such a doing mode that we don't let ourselves practice non-doing. So when we can take moments, whether it's the 3 relaxing sighs, or as I mentioned, the body scan, or even just attention on the breath, feeling the breath, like they are, for the most part, pretty simple practices, but it's a matter of allowing ourselves, like giving ourselves the permission to step away from all of the doing that we do day to day, let alone moment to moment, to experiment, to be curious.
I know I'm really challenged in not doing. I fill every moment thinking about something and being active in something, and take a moment to not do is very hard for me. What are some common challenges that lawyers particularly face in adopting more mindfulness practices?
Sure, this is a great question. This is actually, I know you and I were talking before we started recording, but I teamed up with an executive life coach, and we created a podcast together called Conscious Corner with Annie and Courtney. And in this week's episode that just dropped today, I debunk three of the top, I wouldn't say there's only 3, there's a lot, but 3 of the top misconceptions about mindfulness. And what I think is the biggest, how would I say it? One of the hurdles for attorneys in beginning mindfulness is because we're pulled in so many different directions and we sort of follow a really demanding schedule time-wise, we tell ourselves we don't have the time. Like our plates are so full that just if we're stretched any thinner, we're gonna pass out. Like, it sometimes can feel so overwhelming. But as much as we say in the practices that we want to let go of any sense of efforting, in terms of making time for the formal practice so that we can strengthen our ability to be present, so that we can notice our judgmental tendencies and cultivate some more of these feel-good qualities, we need to make time for the practice. And it doesn't have to be 45 minutes a day, 30, even 20 or 15, but it's more about the regularity. So even taking moments throughout your day to disconnect so that you can connect more fully with yourself, whether it's simply feeling your feet. Like, I don't know, Gary, I see you're seated, but like just directing your attention down to the soles of your feet and actually noticing that we're within a body, like feeling, being curious and as much as possible, not judging, but like opening to the actual felt sensation of what it feels like to have the feet being or making contact with the floor beneath. Like, we're so in our heads that we're not even aware that we're within a body. So giving our moments to step out of doing, from having to fix or resolve, and letting ourselves connect with ourselves, that in turn is going to allow us, when we get back to all the doing that we do, we're going to be able to do from this more centered, nourished place.
And
So yeah, it's a time challenge, but it really does benefit us in the long run.
I know so often I hear lawyers say they don't have time. And
Yeah.
there was a stage in your life, now, of course, taking a course was more time than mindfulness, but you felt you couldn't handle a certain additional thing on your plate. But think back then when you were undergoing all that stress with children and work and fertility issues, if you had a mindfulness practice, the time you invested in mindfulness would have helped you handle those stresses so much better. And I suspect the lawyer who spends 15 minutes in the morning or whenever doing a mindfulness practice will get to the office and be much more focused, much more productive, much more clear-headed, handle the stresses, a lot better, and end up saving time in the long run, wouldn't he or she?
Yeah, and I often talk about our approach to it. If we look at it as another thing on our to-do list, I say, of course, we're going to shut the door right in the face of mindfulness. But if we look at it as not yet another thing on our to-do list, but a really deep practice of self-care, and one that's going to help us to not only care for ourselves, to take better care of ourselves, but one that's going to allow us to better care for, whether it's our family members, our pets, our clients, our friends, our parents, or what have you. If we look at it in that way and we just be curious about it, we start even in the smallest of ways, like 5 minutes each day, which I think everyone can probably find 5 minutes. Then as you begin to taste the fruits of the practice, it's going to give you the momentum to keep at it, because you're going to start to see the ways. Maybe it's small at first, but see how, I'll say, like, one example. We had a student in one of the MBSR programs who had tickets for a symphony for years, lived in Philadelphia, would go and listen to this beautiful music. But it wasn't until she took the MBSR program, she came in and she told the class about how she went. And for the first time, she truly heard. It was like the first time she felt like she was present. So it's simple ways, but yet profound ways that this practice can really enrich our lives.
And how can a mindful practice help that lawyer who feels so stressed and on a treadmill all day, so overwhelmed? What does mindfulness do for that attorney?
So we can start to understand some of our habitual patterns that really don't serve us. I noticed for me that there were tools, or I shouldn't even say tools, vices, or things that I was turning to that I thought were helping me, but really they weren't. Or something like yoga, which can be really helpful, when you're in the yoga studio and you're in downward dog or you're doing the movements, you feel good in that moment. Then when you get back into the grind of the work that we do, you want to learn these resources and these tools that you can put into play right there in the moment. So you don't feel like you have to run and get into a class to really feel that sense of ease. So you start to understand how you get in your own way. You can notice some of your habitual patterns that really aren't serving you. And with that awareness, you can find ways to really nurture yourself. And the practices can reduce stress, They can reduce anxiety. They can help with depression. I know a lot of attorneys, our minds are constantly going, that we struggle with sleep. So we can improve our sleep. We can improve our communication with others, whether it's in our personal lives or if we're dealing with a difficult adversary or a client. So there are a number of ways, but really it's about understanding ourselves more and the ability to recognize some of our habitual patterns is what opens the gateway to taking better care of ourselves.
I like the concept of letting these thoughts flow through without judgment. I think one of the things that many of us struggle with is letting other people and circumstances in our life drive us crazy. The managing partner who doesn't speak to us the way we want or whatever. And I'm a big believer in the concept of acceptance, which I think is often kind of connected with being mindful, to just accepting those circumstances I can't control. And the one thing I can control is how my mind works, what I'm thinking about, how I'm processing those situations.
Yeah, so acceptance is actually one of what's known as the attitudinal foundations. There are these qualities that with a regular practice of mindfulness, we can strengthen and grow, acceptance being one. And like you're saying, like we can't control certain people in our lives, whether it's in our personal world or the professional sector, but what we can control is how we respond. And we can realize that with awareness, we can create some space so we don't react and further compound the stress that we experience, but we can change the dance, so to speak. And it all comes back to ourselves, understanding what's here, what's coming up for us, and then how can I choose to respond wisely in the moment.
One thing I've learned from many years of practicing litigation is in the beginning, I'd see situations where the other attorney would be short with me and I'd be short back, and he'd be louder and I'd be louder, and then we're off to the races. And now I've learned the louder the other attorney is, the softer and more measured and slower I speak. And it immediately diffuses the whole thing, or at least it drives them crazy. But I don't put fire on that fuel and make it get worse. I always slow down. I speak more slowly. I speak more calmly, rather than engaging in that, because I don't want his attitude to control me.
Right, and it really can make all the difference. We can't control how somebody else is going to react, but we can control how much we have to experience, and we can control some of our actions and how we speak, what we say, what we do. So that can make a big difference in the moment and in the big picture.
So now, do you teach or coach lawyers on mindfulness practices and how they can help the lawyers?
I do. So since the pandemic, I've been offering a free 15-minute drop-in session every Thursday via Zoom from 4 to 4:15. That tends to have a good majority are lawyers or other people who are other professionals who work in the legal sector, but also non-lawyers, just professionals, individuals. So that's a free 15-minute drop-in. It's a nice way as you're sort of ending the workday or coming to the close of the workday before you transition back to home or whatever the next part of your day is. It's a nice way to really connect more fully with yourself.
Someone who's listening who would like to attend that drop-in one Thursday, how would they find out about it or get a link to do that?
Sure. So you can go onto my website, Courtney Schulnick, mindfulness.com. Schulnick is a mouthful. It's SCHULNICK. So Courtney Schulnick, mindfulness.com. And you'll see on the website, I believe it's under Zoom, you can find the link to join for that drop-in session. In addition, I'm one of the teachers at the Center for Mindfulness at Jefferson. And each week, on Tuesdays from 12:30 to 12:45, Jefferson offers a similar drop-in session that tends to be bigger in size, close to anywhere from 50 to 75 people on any given day. But it's a really nice way to practice in community and to weave it into the middle of the day. So for that link, you can go to Jefferson Center for Mindfulness site. And then in addition to that, I offer 1 hour workshops, or they can be really accustomed to whatever best suits the needs of a firm or a company. If you want to do a half-hour workshop, a 45-minute, an hour, a 2 hour, I tailor it to whatever really feels most comfortable to that particular organization. And then for those who maybe get a taste of what mindfulness is and they find that it really landed, that their employees really benefit from the practice, I offer a longer program. It's derived from the foundational 8-week MBSR program, but it's a 6-week program. I designed it in a way that is practical for the busy attorney who maybe feels like they don't quite have 2.5 hours to commit once a week for 8 consecutive weeks, but maybe they can commit to 1 hour for 6 consecutive weeks.
So for those lawyers who you've coached about mindfulness, what have you seen? What have they told you about how it's allowed them to practice law in a better way?
A lot of attorneys have told me that they've been able to reduce their stress and anxiety, that it's not only when we're practicing, but that they have cultivated a deeper moment-to-moment awareness, so that when they're being challenged by the attorney on the other side, or maybe they're dealing with a challenging child, or they're stuck in traffic, just everyday occurrences where they would notice that they're adding, I think, as you said, more fuel to the fire, that they're able to use these tools to just take things down a notch. There are people who have chronic pain who have said that they've learned ways to better manage the strong sensations that they experience. And I think in addition, just sort of knowing that we have these inner resources, they're all innate, that we don't have to necessarily go anywhere to get anything, but that we can turn inward. And that can be really empowering for someone who's grappling with whether it's a chronic condition, stress, anxiety, depression.
You know, the nice thing about mindfulness is it's a skill or a power we have within ourselves. We don't have to go to the gym. I like golf. I have to go to a golf course to play golf. This is a power, a relaxation, a self-care practice. It doesn't require equipment, an outside facility. It's something internal that I can develop. Lawyers tend to be skeptical people. They're busy, they're under stress. And I'm sure someone's listening to you today and may be skeptical about what this is or how does it work. What would you say to the skeptical listener that would encourage him or her to give a mindfulness practice a try?
Yeah, so there are a number of scientific studies that really back the benefits of mindfulness. There are case examples that I could go into that I think when you share that with attorneys and they can hear the ways in which, whether it's a 6-week program or just the regularity of committing to the practice, it can really change both the body and the mind in other ways that they maybe wouldn't buy into. I often talk about a study where it was, I won't get too detailed, but it was basically a study where a psychologist by the name of Richie Davidson teamed up with John Kabat-Zinn, who created the Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction program. They offered a 6-week program to employees who really didn't have any experience with mindfulness. And at the end of this study, they found that we could actually use our minds to change the neural pathways within the brain. We can grow certain regions in our brain that promote more positivity and can help us to better manage stress. And we can also improve our immune function. And when you go through the numbers, when you go through the studies, I think an attorney who's skeptical, when they can see that there's like hard data that backs the benefits, they're at least a little, you spark a little curiosity, whereas before maybe they think, oh, this is just, woo-woo or hippy-dippy. There's also a really nice, sometimes if I'm in person or doing it remotely, I'll share a video. Anderson Cooper, he did a study where I think it was a retreat, like a several-day retreat, and they measured through brain electrical activity. They measured, and you can see it, you can actually see the brain, but they show him when he drops into meditation, you can see the area of his brain. I think the red was for anxiety and the blue is when he's feeling more relaxed. You can see with the colors and what's going on in the brain, how in just a few minutes, he's able to step out of reactivity and find more ease. So it sometimes takes numbers and visuals to like show like this is not made up stuff. This stuff really works, but we have to practice. Like you said, it's just like going to the gym. There's a muscle of the mind, and the more and more we practice, the more and more we strengthen it, the more we're able to show up for the present.
You know, we lawyers can be so reactive. So something that helps us to be more present and aware is so important. And for those of you who are listening, I know I myself could be, I could be skeptical, but boy, it's so worth it. You know, you're under so much stress, you're under so much anxiety. I've written so often about how self-care is important. And while I'm no expert on mindfulness for sure, I've always promoted it as a practice that can help us to handle our very busy lives. So for those of you who are open to considering it, you know, drop in on one of Courtney's sessions on a Thursday at 4:00, or reach out to her and learn more. And Courtney, for those who want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to find you?
So I am really active on LinkedIn. You can connect with me. I'm always happy to connect and start a conversation that way. You can also reach out to me if you go to my website. There's an option to connect with me there, and we can talk on the phone. We can have an email exchange. There are also, in terms of just finding out more about what I do and some of my practices that I offer, you can go onto YouTube, search Courtney Schulnick Mindfulness. You'll see that there are various videos and audio recordings. So if you're just curious, you know, what's the formal practice like, you can get a taste of that. And I think they're probably the top 3 ways to connect.
That's great. You know, to everyone who's listening, Courtney was like you. She had children, a busy family, some stress at home, and a lot of work stress. And she found the time to not only take the course, but to become a teacher because she sees the value in it. And I would encourage each of you to listen to her podcast with her and Annie, Conscious Corner, and learn more there, and reach out to Courtney because you deserve it. You deserve a life that's more peaceful and more present. So Courtney, thank you so very much for joining us today and for all your really incredible insights into mindfulness and how it can serve us.
Thank you, Gary. It's been an honor.
Thank you. And to all of you who are listening, thank you so much for being here today. Be present wherever you are. Be present with your family when you're with them. Be present and focused at work. And stay too much out of the future and the past because they never make us feel good. Take care of yourselves. And as always, please be well, be safe, and be free.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Free Lawyer Podcast. Wherever you are listening, if you enjoyed what I shared, please leave me a rating and review. I would appreciate hearing more about what you like best and what topics you might like me to cover in future episodes. If you are interested in experiencing a more fulfilling and a more successful life, please contact me at www.garymiles.net, where you can schedule a free discovery call with me so I can learn more about you, your challenges, and your dreams. I appreciate each and every one of you and have a great rest of your day. Thanks to all of you for your support.